The Arizona Cardinals are in what has to be described as the low point of the 2021 NFL season. Despite the fact that they're 10-4, first in the NFC West, and currently holding on to the number 4 seed in the NFC, they just came off the most disappointing loss in years. The Cardinals lost to the then 1-11-1 Detroit Lions, who are now 2-11-1. And going into a Christmas game in primetime that should be a high point for the Cardinals this year, things aren't going to get any easier. They're facing what might be a nightmare matchup for the Cardinals in the Indianapolis Colts. Now, sure, the Colts have fewer wins than the Cardinals. They're 8-6. They're currently second place in their own division, and they're the number 5 seed in the AFC. But they've won 5 of their last 6 games, whereas the Cardinals have lost 4 of their last 7. But what makes this a nightmare matchup isn't the fact just that the Colts are hot and the Cardinals are cold. It's really about the matchups in this game. So let's look at how these two teams match up. When we look at the offensive side of the ball, the Cardinals are currently ranked 8th in the league in terms of total yards per game, whereas the Colts are ranked 13th. But you see that these two teams excel in different parts of the offense. The Cardinals are 8th in yards per game in terms of passing, whereas the Colts are 22nd in that measure. Now, the Cardinals are also respectable in rushing yards per game, ranking 11th in the league, but the Colts are second only behind the Philadelphia Eagles in total rushing yards per game. And in points per game, you see the Colts actually edge the Cardinals. They're ranked 3rd, whereas the Cardinals are ranked 8th. But it's the Colts running game that is this nightmare for the Cardinals. Because when you look at defensive ranks, you see that the Cardinals actually rank better than the Colts overall. They're 7th in yards allowed per game, 5th in passing yards per game, but they're 17th in rushing yards allowed per game. And they fare pretty well in terms of points per game, 5th. Now, the Colts defense overall isn't as good as the Cardinals. They're 15th in total yards per game, 15th in passing yards per game allowed, and 14th in rushing yards per game. And they rank 9th in points per game allowed. But where things could potentially get really ugly for the Cardinals is in the rushing game, because the Colts have a one-man wrecking machine in Jonathan Taylor at running back. You see that on 270 carries, he has rushed for 1,518 yards, averaging 5.6 yards per carry and scoring 17 rushing touchdowns. He's also part of the passing game with 36 receptions, 336 yards, 9.3 yard average, and 2 touchdowns. And you see that his PFF grade of 90.0 with a grade of 90.8 in the run are outstanding. In fact, he ranks number 1 in the NFL amongst running backs. Taylor has been so good this year that his name has regularly come up in MVP discussions. Now, that award often goes to quarterbacks, and it is unlikely that Taylor would win it. But if there's someone who's going to win that award this year who isn't a quarterback, it's going to be Taylor. And anyone who's followed the Cardinals this year knows that the run defense has been their Achilles heel. This game is a nightmare matchup for the Cardinals because their biggest strength lines up with the Cardinals' biggest weakness: running the ball against rushing defense. But that's not all the Colts have going for them. Quarterback Carson Wentz is having an outstanding season. Now, throughout his career, he's been up and down and he's been injured a lot. But he's been really efficient this year. He's completing 62.7% of his passes for 3,005 yards. But what's most impressive is he's thrown 23 touchdowns against only 6 interceptions. And his quarterback rating is 95.3. Now, his PFF grades are decent but not exceptional, and Kyler Murray does rate higher than him in terms of these metrics. But altogether, he is a capable quarterback who's having a solid year for the Colts. Now, overall, when you take everything into account, these teams do, on paper at least, look like actually pretty evenly matched teams. And one of the best metrics to look at this, in my opinion, is Football Outsiders' DVOA. It's a metric that takes into account not only yards gained or yards given up, but looks at situational football, giving more weight to how teams perform in crucial situations. When you compare DVOA between the Cardinals and Colts, you see they are a pretty evenly matched team. Overall, the Cardinals rank 9th in total DVOA, whereas the Colts rank 8th. Now, weighted DVOA gives more weight to more recent games. It's really a measure of how teams are performing recently. And because of the fact that the Cardinals have struggled recently and the Colts have been hot, it shouldn't be a surprise that the Cardinals' weighted DVOA is down to 11th, whereas the Colts is up to 6th. When we look at offensive DVOA, the Cardinals rank 17th and the Colts rank 10th, but the Cardinals do fare better in defensive DVOA and special teams DVOA, ranking 5th in defense and 12th in special teams compared to 8th for the Colts in defense and 13th for special teams. But let's look at one more thing as we compare these two teams. Let's go position by position and identify which team, at least in my opinion, is stronger in that position. On quarterback, I'm going to give the nod to the Cardinals. Now, Murray struggled recently. Wentz is having an outstanding year. But when Murray's playing his game, he is a better quarterback than Carson Wentz. In terms of running back, clearly I'm going to give the nod to the Colts. Now, the Cardinals running backs have been very good, no doubt, but they don't measure up to what Taylor has done this year. When it comes to receivers or pass catchers, and I'm including tight ends in this, I am going to give the nod to the Cardinals, even with Hopkins out. The Colts have a couple nice receivers, but I think the Cardinals' depth at this position is still better than the Colts, even with the injuries. But when we look at offensive line, I need to give the nod to the Colts. They have an outstanding offensive line anchored by arguably the best guard in the league in Quentin Nelson. When we look at their defensive interior line, I'm going to give the nod to the Colts as well. The Cardinals have really struggled in the defensive interior, and that's probably a big part of the reason they're bad against the run. If J.J. Watt were healthy, this might be a little bit closer, but with DeForest Buckner on the defensive interior and the Cardinals' struggles against the run, this one clearly has to go to the Colts. When we look at edge rushers, I'm going to give the nod to the Cardinals. The Cardinals' outside pass rushers and Chandler Jones and Marcus Golden both are on pace to have double-digit sack seasons, whereas the Colts' best outside pass rushers, Toure and Pay, each have 5 sacks apiece. Now, when it comes to linebackers, the edge clearly has to go to the Colts. Darius Leonard is a stud, and Bobby Okereke is an ascending player. The Cardinals' inside linebackers have really struggled, especially against the run. And first-round rookie linebacker Zaven Collins hasn't even been able to see the field lately. Now, when we look at the secondary, I'm going to give the nod to the Cardinals. This is mostly on the strength of their safeties. When it comes to cornerbacks, I'd say the groups are pretty comparable, and you might even give the Colts a little bit of an edge. But I think the Cardinals' tandem of Budda Baker and Jalen Thompson gives them the edge over the Colts. Now, in special teams, this one was somewhat close. Neither kicker has been that much better than the other. Andy Lee's been a better punter than the Colts punter in terms of yards, but the Colts punter has had more punts within the 20-yard line. But I gave the edge to the Colts because their return game has been better than that of the Cardinals. So when you look at all the metrics and the position-by-position comparison, these two teams actually seem to be fairly evenly matched. But as we talked about, the Colts' strength could be a nightmare for the Cardinals. Jonathan Taylor could be running all over this defense from quarter 1 to quarter 4. But for us Cardinals fans, there is hope. Because despite the fact that the Cardinals have been bad against the run, they've still won 10 games this year, including a blowout win of the Rams earlier in the season. This team has struggled against the run all year and still managed to win 10 games despite that. Don't get me wrong, this matchup worries me, but it also wouldn't surprise me if the Cardinals offense comes out, starts clicking again, puts up some points, resulting in the Colts having to abandon the run and try to play from behind. Now, I'm not saying this is going to happen. With the way the Cardinals have played lately, I'm not going to go into this that optimistic. But with the talent on the Cardinals roster, it's absolutely possible. One thing I do know is this is one heck of a matchup for Christmas night. How do you feel about this matchup? Let me know in the comments below. And while you're there, please do me a favor and click like and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on The Cardinal Rule.